Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan, listeners. We always like to dig deep into Islamic teachings, and today we're diving into something that I think we've all pondered at some point.
Oh, yeah.
It's about oaths,
Mm-hmm.
those promises we make, those vows before Allah.
Right.
Specifically, we're looking at Sahih Bukhari Hadith, Book 79, all about expiation for unfulfilled oaths. Because let's face it, we're human.
We are.
We slip up. So what happens when we make an oath and, well, we don't quite keep it?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. It's a question a lot of us ask. And in Islam, oaths, they're not just casual promises. They hold a real weight, It's about demonstrating that sincerity, that commitment in front of Allah.
And the fact that there's a whole book dedicated to this, to what happens when those oaths are broken,
Right.
well, that tells you something about how important it is to get back on track, to seek that right action, even when we falter.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the idea that, it's not just about saying, oops, I messed up. It's about genuinely understanding how to seek forgiveness, how to realign ourselves when we stumble.
About that journey back.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is, it's not about punishment. It's more about recognizing that we're human, we make mistakes, and providing that path back to that state of Ihsan, that excellence in our actions and intentions.
I love that. Okay, so let's dive into the first hadith, number 699. It starts off with something pretty relatable, lice.
Yeah, lice. Not the most glamorous topic.
Not exactly, but it sets the stage perfectly. So we have Ka'b bin Ujra, may Allah be pleased with him, and he's going to the Prophet, peace be upon him, bothered by these pesky little creatures.
Right.
And what's fascinating is that the advice he gets, it's not just about hygiene, it speaks to the heart of expiation.
You're so right. And here's where it gets interesting. So the Prophet, he advises him to shave his head, right? A symbolic act of cleansing. And then he lays out 3 options for expiation. First, you can fast for 3 days. Second, you can give tzedakah, that voluntary charity, to 6 needy people. Or third, you can offer an animal sacrifice, a sheep, as Ayub clarifies in his narration of this hadith.
So even for something that seems like a minor oath, there's this structured way to seek atonement.
Absolutely. And notice it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's like there's a level of commitment in each of those options, almost like it recognizes that an individual's capacity to fulfill that commitment might differ.
Oh, that's a great point. It's not about, punishing yourself. It's about recognizing where you are in your journey of seeking forgiveness.
Exactly. And this tiered approach, even back then, shows the compassion at the heart of Islamic teachings.
Remarkable. Now let's contrast that with the next set of hadiths, numbers 700 to 702. Things get a bit more serious here because we're talking about breaking the Ramadan fast.
Yeah, a very different situation.
We're introduced to a man who's completely distraught because he had intimate relations with his wife while fasting.
Right, a situation where he feels that weight of what he's done.
Yeah, you can almost feel the weight of his despair. Ramadan is such a sacred time, and fasting is so central. He even cries out, "I am ruined."
Absolutely. But the Prophet, his response is so telling. He doesn't condemn the man. Instead, he offers, again, a tiered system of expiation. And this time, it starts with freeing a slave.
Which, especially back then, was a huge act of charity and social justice.
Exactly. And it speaks to how seriously breaking the fast is taken. But it also highlights that there's this immense potential for spiritual growth through atonement.
But the man, unfortunately, he couldn't afford to free a slave. So then what?
The Prophet, compassionate as ever, he says, okay, well then, fast for 2 consecutive months.
Not exactly a walk in the park.
Definitely a serious commitment, showing that true repentance requires effort. But as we learn, even this was beyond the man's capability.
Oh, wow.
So the Prophet presents the third option. He says, okay, then feed 60 poor people.
It's getting intense. I'm like on the edge of my seat, wondering what's going to happen.
And that's where the story takes this amazing turn. Just as the man feels all hope is lost, an Ansari man arrives carrying a large basket filled with dates. And the Prophet, smiling radiantly, tells the man, take these dates and give them in charity.
It seems like the perfect solution.
Right. But there's a twist. The man, overwhelmed with his own poverty, he says, to someone poorer than us, by him who sent you with the truth, there is no house between the 2 mountains of Medina poorer than ours.
Such raw honesty. It's a reminder that sometimes we're the ones in need of that help.
Absolutely. And the Prophet, you know what he does? He smiles again. And this time, the hadith even mentions his premolar teeth becoming visible. And he says, take these dates and feed your family with them.
Wow, that's powerful. I mean, talk about understanding, about meeting people where they are.
Islamic law isn't just about rules, it's about compassion, recognizing that sometimes the most righteous act is taking care of your own household.
It's a reminder that context matters. Blindly following rules isn't enough. It's about that balance between fulfilling obligations and recognizing individual needs.
Right on. That theme keeps coming up in these teachings. Let's shift gears a bit now to Hadiths 703 and 704, which introduce this concept of mud, a unit of measurement they used during the Prophet's time.
Okay. Might seem like a minor detail, but I bet it's more significant than it appears.
You're right, it is. See, these hadiths highlight the importance of being accurate, particularly when it comes to zakat, that obligatory charity and expiation for oaths. During the Prophet's time, the sa, another measurement, was equal to 1 mud and 1/3 of a mud.
Okay.
And later, during the reign of Caliph Umar bin Abdulaziz, it got increased.
So even back then, they were really focused on getting these measurements right.
Absolutely. It was about being fair, being consistent in Islamic practices.
Hadith 704 zooms in on Ibn Umar. May Allah be pleased with him.
Oh.
He was known for his piety, always sticking to the Prophet's example.
Absolutely.
And it mentions how he'd used the Prophet's mud meticulously when giving Zakat al-Fitr, the charity at the end of Ramadan, and even when offering expiation for oaths.
Yeah, they paid attention to the details, looking to the Prophet as their guide.
And there's even a story about Malik, a big scholar from Medina. He stressed using the Prophet's mud, even when rulers wanted to use a different standard.
It's like they're saying, no, we have to go back to the source, back to the Prophet's way.
And in Hadith 705, the Prophet actually asks Allah to bless the people of Medina for their measures, the sa and the mud. Shows how even something like measuring is tied to faith.
Yeah, it's a reminder that every part of our life can be an act of worship when done with the right intentions. Okay, so let's move on to the next set of hadiths, 706, 707, and 708.
Yeah.
These are all about freeing slaves, which, as we know, was considered a huge good deed in Islam.
A major act of charity and social justice.
Right. Hadith 706 states that for every part of a slave's body freed the person who freed them, well, the corresponding part of their body will be saved from hellfire.
Whoa.
A powerful way to emphasize the spiritual benefit of such an act. It speaks to the value Islam places on freedom and dignity,
Makes you think. And in Hadith 707, we see this amazing example of the Prophet actually helping to free a slave.
Oh, right. So there was this Ansari man who had declared his slave mudabar, meaning he'd be freed upon the owner's death.
Good intention, but there was a problem, right?
Yeah, the slave was all he had. But when the Prophet heard this, he turned to his companions and said, "Who'll buy him for me?"
What happened?
Nu'aym bin Anaham, he stepped up and bought the slave for 800 dirhams, allowing the Ansari man to fulfill his promise and the slave to finally be free.
What a beautiful example of community support for a good deed. And the Prophet's right there making it happen.
It really shows the importance of collective responsibility. And then Hadith 708, it introduces wala, which is this right of patronage. It can be a bit complex.
I was going to say, could you break that down a bit?
Sure. So the hadith clarifies that the wala belongs to the person who actually frees the slave, not the buyer. Aisha, the Prophet's wife, she wanted to buy Barira, a slave girl, but her master said they wanted to keep the wala.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't just about the money, but who held that responsibility toward the freed person?
Exactly. True liberation is about more than just a transaction. It's about social and legal autonomy. Okay, let's jump to Hadiths 709 and 710 now, where we get a story about the Prophet himself and his own experience with oaths.
All right, bring on the wisdom.
This is where we delve into this idea of breaking an oath if you can do something even better.
Ooh, okay, that's tricky.
So the Prophet had sworn he wouldn't give mounts to a group of people from the Ash'ari tribe.
Okay.
But later, when some booty was acquired, he decided to gift them camels.
I bet some people were confused. Like, didn't he swear an oath?
Oh, yeah. Some even went back to the Prophet, worried about being cursed for benefiting from a broken oath.
Yeah.
But the Prophet clarified that it's actually permissible to break an oath if it allows you to do something better. But here's the catch.
There's a catch.
You have to make expiation for that broken oath.
Okay, so it's not just about breaking promises willy-nilly.
Not at all. It's about recognizing there's a hierarchy of good deeds. And sometimes prioritizing a greater benefit means changing course.
It's about intention, about striving for good, but also about accountability for the promises we make.
Exactly. It's a nuanced approach, a reminder that even when aiming for the best outcome, we still acknowledge the weight of our commitments.
All right, let's talk about Hadith 711. It tells the story of Prophet Solomon, who wanted lots of children to fight for Allah.
A noble goal, right? He planned to sleep with all 90 of his wives, each bearing a son for a lost cause.
Wow, 90 wives.
Right. But here's the thing. He forgot a crucial detail. He didn't say, if Allah wills.
And that had some big consequences, didn't it? Only one wife conceived, and even then it was only half a boy.
Exactly. It's a stark reminder that even with good intentions, we aren't in control. We plan, but Allah decides.
So, inshallah is more than just something we say out of habit.
It's about recognizing our dependence on Allah. True success comes from aligning our desires with His will.
Beautiful. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's explore those hadiths, 712 to 714, that I like to call the chicken conundrum. It's a simple dinner party story, but I feel like there's more to it.
Oh, you're right. It perfectly shows how these principles show up in everyday life. So Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, he's having a meal with guests, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of them, he's sworn not to eat chicken.
Why not?
The hadith doesn't say exactly why, but it seems he considered it unclean for some personal reason. So Abu Musa, being the great host that he is, encourages the man to eat, even saying he saw the Prophet eat chicken himself.
Sounds like a tough spot for the guest. Social etiquette versus a personal vow.
Exactly. And here's the brilliant part. Abu Musa brings up the story about the Prophet and the mounts, how he broke his oath for a better deed. He reminds the guest that it's okay to break an oath if you can do something better, as long as you make expiation.
It's a subtle way to teach about the flexibility of oaths, right?
It shows that these teachings apply even to something as simple as a meal.
Islam isn't just about grand gestures. It's about awareness and intention in every moment.
Absolutely. Abu Musa's guidance is all about understanding that nuance, that flexibility within Islamic law. It's about living the teachings, not just knowing them.
And finding that balance, upholding our commitments, while striving for the greater good in everything we do.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, I think we'll pause here, leaving everyone to ponder the chicken conundrum and what it means for their own lives.
That story about Abu Musa and the chicken, it really brings home how these teachings about oaths and expiation, they can pop up anywhere, even at a dinner party.
It's a great reminder that Islam, it's not just about those big rituals and grand gestures. It's about how we approach every single part of our lives with that awareness, that intention.
Couldn't have said it better myself. But before we get too carried away with chicken dinners, we still have one more important hadith to cover. Hadith number 715, where the Prophet gives some profound advice to Abdurrahman bin Samurah.
Ah, yes, those concentrated drops of wisdom, right? I'm ready. What guidance did the Prophet give?
Well, this hadith, it's like a parting gift, It brings together a lot of the things we've been talking about in this whole deep dive. The Prophet, peace be upon him, he advised Abdurrahman on two very important matters.
Okay, two pieces of advice. Let's break them down. What was the first one?
So the Prophet, he cautioned Abdurrahman about seeking leadership positions. He said, don't go looking to be a ruler. Because if you're given authority without asking for it, Allah will help you. But if you get it because you asked for it, you'll be held accountable, meaning Allah won't help you.
Wow. That's a powerful statement about leadership in Islam. It's not about power grabbing or personal gain. It's about service, responsibility. A true leader, they're chosen by Allah. They approach the role with humility, with a sincere desire to serve the community.
Exactly. It's like a warning, Don't go chasing after positions of authority just to boost your ego or for your own personal gain. That kind of ambition, it can lead to some pretty bad outcomes. But when someone's given leadership and their intentions are pure, when they seek Allah's guidance, they'll receive that divine support they need to fulfill their responsibilities.
It's a good reminder that true leadership, it comes from Allah, not from our own ambitions. Okay, so what about the second piece of advice? What did the Prophet say?
The second piece of advice, well, it goes right back to our conversation about oaths. The Prophet, he basically repeats what we talked about earlier about breaking an oath if a better deed comes along. He said, if you take an oath to do something and later on you find something better, then do that better thing and make expiation for dissolving your oath.
It shows again that flexibility within Islamic law, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not about being rigid, but about understanding the spirit of the law, always striving to do what pleases Allah most.
You got it. It's about prioritizing what's right, recognizing that sometimes things change and a better path opens up. But we can't just forget our initial promise. That's where expiation comes in.
It's a beautiful balance between seeking the best outcome and acknowledging our commitments. It's saying, I made a promise, and even though I'm choosing a better path, I still recognize the weight of that original promise.
Right. It's a nuanced approach to ethical decision-making. Now, this hadith, it really summarizes this whole book on expiation for unfulfilled oaths. It's about finding that balance, fulfilling our commitments, but also striving for the best possible outcome. We seek Allah's guidance when things get complex, and we always aim to do what's right, even if it means adjusting our plans.
It's like the Prophet is giving us this roadmap, showing us how to live a life of integrity, compassion, and conscious decision-making. Approach our commitments with sincerity, seeking Allah's help when we stumble, and always trying to do what's right, even if it means changing direction.
Well said. As we start wrapping up our deep dive into Sahih Bukhari, Book 79, what are some of the main takeaways you think our listeners should really ponder?
Well, for me, it's been a real eye-opener to see just how important oaths are in Islam. They're not just casual promises, they're solemn commitments made before Allah.
Yeah.
And breaking an oath, it's not something to take lightly. We learned that there are specific ways to seek forgiveness and make things right.
And those methods of expiation, they're so varied and adaptable. It shows how compassionate and understanding Islamic law can be.
For sure. The story about that man who broke his fast during Ramadan, that one really stuck with me. It showed the Prophet's kindness and how Islamic teachings can take into account people's individual needs.
Right. It's not about blindly punishing ourselves. It's about feeling genuine remorse and wanting to make things right.
Then there's that whole concept of breaking an oath for a better deed. It really makes you think about what it means to keep a promise. Sometimes doing the right thing means changing our plans, even if we made a vow.
And it emphasizes that good actions, they're what really matters. Sometimes fulfilling the spirit of a commitment means changing the letter of the law. Of course, we always seek Allah's guidance and make expiation for any broken oaths.
We also learned about those accurate measurements, the immense reward for freeing slaves, and the importance of remembering Allah's will in everything we do. Saying, inshallah, isn't just a habit, it's acknowledging that ultimately Allah's in control.
It's like we've been given this toolkit for dealing with promises, oaths, and seeking forgiveness. It's all about sincerity, accountability, and always turning to Allah for guidance.
It's been an amazing journey so far. What are your final thoughts as we head into the last part of our deep dive? Wow, it feels like we've really been on this incredible journey with Book 79, learning about oaths, expiation, and how to really strive for that righteousness. But as you said, the learning doesn't stop here. So how do we actually take all these teachings and make them relevant in our lives today? I mean, things are so different now from the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him.
You're right. That's the key question, isn't it? And, the world might look different on the surface, but those core principles, those are timeless. I think one of the biggest takeaways here is to really be mindful of the oaths we take. Think about it. Today, promises are made so casually, commitments are fleeting.
It's like we say, I swear, without even thinking about it.
Exactly. But for us, as Muslims, our words, they should mean something, right?
They hold weight.
They do. An oath, it's a promise made in front of Allah, so it's serious, no matter how big or small the issue might seem.
So we should really pause before saying, I swear by Allah. Take a moment to think about what we're committing to be honest with ourselves about whether we can actually fulfill that promise.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
It's about Ihsan.
Yeah.
Right? Taking those extra steps to make sure what we do matches what we intend.
Beautifully put. And then if we do find ourselves in a situation where we've broken an oath, that's when we go back to those teachings. Seek forgiveness. Make things right through the proper expiation.
It's about taking responsibility, owning up to our mistakes, and moving forward with a stronger commitment to do better.
Now, that concept of breaking an oath for a better deed, that really resonates with me today. I mean, we're constantly facing choices, and sometimes what seemed right at one point, well, a more virtuous path, a more beneficial path comes along.
It's about being courageous enough to change course, to reevaluate and choose what truly aligns with our values, even if it means changing our original plans.
Precisely. But even then, remember, expiation is still crucial. It acknowledges that initial commitment, It shows we don't just toss aside promises on a whim. It's all about seeking Allah's guidance when things get tricky.
It's about striving for good while also honoring our commitment. A beautiful balance. Now, something you mentioned earlier really got me thinking. Most of the examples we've been looking at, they're about personal oaths, like actions or behaviors. But what about oaths of allegiance, those made in legal or political situations? Do these same teachings apply there?
That's a really good question. And honestly, it's one that scholars have been debating for ages. Things get even more nuanced in those cases. We have to think carefully about the context, what the oath is about, and what might happen if it's broken.
So there's no easy answer.
Not really.
Yeah.
It requires us to really dig into those principles we've been talking about and apply them thoughtfully to each situation. And that's what I find so fascinating about these texts. They give us a framework, some guidelines, but ultimately we have to engage with them critically, use what we've learned to navigate our own unique lives.
It's like we've been given this map, but we still have to choose our own path.
Yeah.
We use that knowledge as our compass.
Beautifully said. This whole deep dive into Sahih Bukhari, Book 79, it's been about understanding the weight of our words, the importance of seeking forgiveness, and that constant effort to reach that state of Ihsan, of excellence in everything we do.
It's been a great reminder that these teachings, they're not just abstract ideas. They're meant to guide us every day,
Yeah.
to help us face those challenges and make choices with wisdom and compassion.
And as we wrap up our journey through Book 79, I really encourage our listeners to keep thinking about these principles. Talk about them with your families, your communities, and see how they can shed light on your own paths towards a life that's pleasing to Allah.
Thank you for being with us on this deep dive into the Echoes of Ihsan. May these teachings inspire all of us to live with more intention, integrity, and that constant desire to seek Allah's pleasure in everything we do. Until next time, may Allah guide us all towards that path of righteousness.